I think they're going to have a battle ahead because the Mark Paliza, if I'm saying his name right, Vice President of Uranium Resources, Inc., called the 27,000 square miles of Navajo country the biggest prize of all, the Saudi Arabia of uranium. So I think that there's probably going to be a lot of backdoor maneuvering here, and that the Navajo are up against a pretty big opponent.
Every mining company, though, claims that it has the best spot in the world. I mean, take a look at what's going on in the Santa Ritas right now, south of Tucson. They are saying that that's the best copper in the world. You know, it's just, and there are other companies that are concurrently saying that on their websites where they have. Still, there are probably richer areas in Montana and the like, but that all aside, the Navajo Nation is deciding not to allow it. They still have people dying from the last round of it, and they are saying that. That was in the news article that you're referring to. And there are groups that are set up to oppose it. The Widows of Red Rock. We did fundraisers for the Widows of Red Rock in 1976 to the early 80s, selling pictures of Diane O'Leary's work, you know, a Navajo assimilated Navajo artist. And so there is a lot that's going on to oppose that. I don't think they'll be able to get their way.
And the Navajo Nation is a sovereign nation, and they can stop this. And I'm reminded of what I learned about how they took this to the Supreme Court, why these miners weren't warned, and the U.S. Supreme Court said they didn't have to tell them about the hazards. I don't think they'll ever forget how they were treated.
Right. Jack, let's go to alternatives. We've alluded to them a bit, but can you talk a little bit more about how realistically we can expect them to provide an answer to our energy problems?
Well, I think the hopeful side of looking at the challenges that we face to keep carbon emissions at current levels 50 years in the future while producing more energy to meet global demand, that is our challenge, so that we don't risk, you know, the climate disruptions that may be ahead of us with global warming. So that is our challenge, and we do have to somehow produce enough energy to meet human demand, because the consequences could indeed be tragic on one hand if there's not sufficient energy, or if there's a major breakdown in an energy supply. So we have to look at alternatives. Well, the power plants that are going to be supplying our power in 50 years have not yet been built, and they're only beginning to be planned for by the utility companies and by the regulatory agencies in the states and in the nation. The buildings that we're going to live in have not yet been designed and built, for the most part, that we're going to be using 50 years hence. The transportation systems, the personal transportation that we use for automobiles now, and public transportation systems that we're going to be using 40, 50 years from now have not yet been designed. So there is hope to change our approach to energy production and use by conscious decisions made by visionary politicians today to invest in the technologies that are already proven. So if you want electricity, you can invest right now off-the-shelf technology in wind. Wind has its drawbacks. Just to take one principal alternative that I think will be critical to displacing carbon output, and that is wind power producing electricity. The major issue for wind power that we face is the intermittency of the supply. The wind does not always blow. This requires sensitive siting so that you get the best, you know, production. It requires redesigning the grid that distributes electricity, so that instead of having a lot of highly productive centralized power plants like Palo, Verde, or big coal-fired generating plants, we have a distributed grid, so that as the future of energy evolves, we tap production at a lot of different sources on a smaller scale. So smaller wind farms scattered to overall compensate for the problems of an intermittent supply. Likewise with solar photovoltaic for electricity, the sun doesn't always shine. You need to either have multiple sources of supply on a distributed grid, or you need to have these big centralized water boilers, which is all a nuclear power plant does, is boil water, you know, for the steam generation of electricity. So we need to look at investing right now. We have these technologies that can produce the electricity that we will need into the future if we really ramp up the industrial production of windmills, of solar photovoltaic technologies. But it requires some changes in our outlook about what we're seeking. We're not seeking centralized power, we're seeking a distributed grid. And the cost of bringing wind online is comparable to the cost of bringing nuclear online. It is a capital-intensive technology at the very beginning to make all of these windmills. But that is an investment, the cost of which is destined to go down with the economies of scale. Whereas if you look at a nuclear power plant in the history that Russell was outlining in the cost per kilowatt hour, if anything, with more of us demanding safer nuclear power, the cost of producing that kilowatt hour is only going to go up. There's no way to imagine that the cost of producing nuclear power will go down in the future. It'll stay the same if they're lucky, but the odds are it's going to go up. But all of these alternatives that the nuclear proponents are telling us are too expensive right now, they're only going to go down. And that's where we really need to put our money now, is investing in those alternatives to meet the energy needs in the future.